At the bottom of the world, separated from the nearest continent by 150 miles of violent ocean, lies an island that doesn't quite fit into the modern age. Tasmania. An island so remote that when the British Empire needed a place to send its most dangerous criminals, this is where they chose. A place so far from civilization that escape was considered impossible. Not because of walls or guards, but because of the ocean itself. The distance, the storms, the emptiness beyond. For the convicts who arrived in chains in the 1800s, Tasmania was the end of the line. The bottom of the world in every sense. A place where hope went to die. But here's what they didn't know. What nobody knew until much later. Tasmania wasn't a wasteland, it was a sanctuary. One of the most biodiverse islands on Earth. A place where forests older than human memory still stand. Where mountains carve their reflections into glacial lakes. Where coastlines remain so wild that footprints wash away before anyone returns. Today, 40% of Tasmania is protected as World Heritage Wilderness, more than any other Australian state. And yet, it remains one of the least visited, least understood places in the country. Most travellers never make it here. They land in Sydney or Melbourne, explore the outback, visit the reef, and fly home thinking they've seen Australia. But they haven't. Because Australia's wildest, strangest, most haunted corner sits 150 miles south across a stretch of water that has swallowed more ships than almost any other passage on Earth. This is Tasmania. An island that exists at the intersection of beauty and brutality. Where civilization clings to the edges and wilderness owns the interior. Where history is written in stone ruins and ancient trees. Where the last of a species vanished into legend, leaving only photographs and regret. This is not the Australia you know. This is the Australia that time forgot. The bottom of the world. Let's begin. Our journey begins where most journeys to Tasmania begin. Hobart. The capital city. The second oldest city in Australia. And one of the southernmost capitals in the world. Latitude 42.8 degrees south. For context, that's further south than Cape Town, Buenos Aires or Auckland. The only capital cities further south are Wellington, New Zealand, and a handful of research stations in Antarctica. Hobart sits on the banks of the Derwent River, pressed between the water and the shadow of Mount Wellington, a 4,000-foot peak that dominates the skyline like a geological guardian. The mountain decides the city's weather. When clouds gather on its summit, Hobart knows rain is coming. When snow dusts the peak, even in summer, locals barely blink. This is normal. This is the bottom of the world. The city itself feels like it exists in two time periods at once. Modern glass towers rise alongside Georgian sandstone warehouses built by convict labour in the 1820s. Sleek cafes operate in buildings that once stored whale oil and timber. The old and new don't clash here. They coexist quietly like everything in Tasmania. Walk along Salamanca Place and you're walking on history. These sandstone warehouses, built by men in chains, now host galleries, restaurants, and the famous Saturday market. The stone walls are over 2 centuries old, thick enough to withstand not just time, but the violent storms that occasionally sweep up the Derwent from the Southern Ocean. But Hobart's real story isn't in its architecture, it's in its position. This city exists on the edge of the habitable world. South of here, there's nothing but ocean, ice, and Antarctica. For whalers in the 1800s, Hobart was the last port before months at sea. For explorers heading to the Antarctic, it was the final stop before the ice. And for convicts, it was the end of everything they knew. The city's waterfront is still dominated by fishing boats and yachts, many preparing for the Sydney to Hobart yacht race, one of the world's most dangerous ocean races. Every year on December 26th, boats leave Sydney Harbour and sail 630 nautical miles south, crossing the Bass Strait, one of the most treacherous stretches of water on Earth. The race has killed sailors. In 1998, a storm turned the strait into a graveyard. Waves reached 60 feet, winds exceeded 80 knots. 6 sailors died. 5 boats sank, and yet the race continues. Because that's what Tasmania demands: respect, endurance, and the understanding that nature here doesn't negotiate. From Hobart's waterfront, you can see the River Derwent widening toward the sea. Beyond it, Storm Bay. And beyond that, the Southern Ocean, stretching unbroken to Antarctica. There are no islands, no landmasses, just water, wind, and the roaring 40s, the band of westerly winds that circle the globe at this latitude, uninterrupted by land. This is what it means to live at the bottom of the world. You feel the planet's curve, you sense the emptiness beyond, and you understand, viscerally, that civilization is a thin layer on a very wild place. But Hobart is just the beginning. The gateway. To understand Tasmania, you have to leave the city behind and venture into the places that made this island legendary. Places where stone walls still stand as monuments to suffering. Where forests swallow sound. Where coastlines remain unnamed. And it begins at the most haunted place in Australia. An hour's drive southeast of Hobart, the road narrows and winds through dense eucalyptus forest. The air smells of salt and wood smoke, and then, suddenly, the trees part and you see it. Port Arthur, a complex of stone buildings on a peninsula, surrounded on 3 sides by water. What was once Australia's most feared prison is now its most visited historical site, and one of its most haunted. Port Arthur was not just a prison, it was a statement, a demonstration of what happened to those who defied the empire. Men who were already convicts in other colonies, men who committed crimes after arriving in Australia, were sent here. To the prison beyond the prison. The place where hope was systematically dismantled. The location was chosen deliberately. The Tasman Peninsula is connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of land called Eaglehawk Neck, less than 100 feet wide at its narrowest point. The British placed guard dogs across this isthmus, chained at intervals, trained to attack. The message was clear: you cannot leave, and even if you made it past the dogs, what then? Swim across the freezing bay where guards had spread rumors of sharks? Trek through dense forest with no food, no compass, no knowledge of the land? Or build a boat with no tools, no materials, and no hope of reaching the mainland 60 miles away? Port Arthur was designed to break men, not through violence, though there was plenty of that, but through isolation and hopelessness. The architecture itself was a weapon. Walk through the ruins today and you feel it. The stone buildings, remarkably preserved, stand in silence. The church, roofless now, its Gothic arches open to the sky. The separate prison where solitary confinement was perfected. The asylum where men whose minds couldn't withstand the isolation were locked away. One of the most disturbing innovations at Port Arthur was the silent system. Prisoners were forbidden from speaking. They wore hoods when moved between buildings so they couldn't see or be seen by others. Even in chapel, they sat in individual wooden stools, isolated, unable to make eye contact. The idea was that silence and reflection would lead to reform. It led to madness instead. The asylum filled. Some men went catatonic, others became violent. A few took their own lives. The system was eventually abandoned, but not before it had destroyed hundreds of minds. By the time Port Arthur closed in 1877, over 12,000 convicts had passed through. Some served their sentences and left. Others died here and were buried in the Isle of the Dead, a small island in the bay where over 1,000 graves mark the resting place of convicts, guards, and free settlers. Today, the Isle of the Dead is accessible by boat. The graves are simple, many unmarked. The convicts were buried in mass graves, their names recorded only in ledgers. The guards and free settlers had individual headstones, but even those have weathered and cracked after 150 years of Tasmanian wind and rain. Ghost tours run at Port Arthur after dark. Guides lead groups through the ruins by lantern light, telling stories of apparitions, unexplained sounds, and the overwhelming sense of sadness that permeates the site. Skeptics dismiss it. But even they admit the place feels wrong after sunset. Too quiet, too heavy. Port Arthur is a reminder of what Tasmania was, a place so remote that the Empire used it as the ultimate punishment. But it's also a reminder of what Tasmania became, a place that survived its darkest chapter and transformed into something else entirely. Leaving Port Arthur, the road climbs back into the forest. The stone walls disappear behind the trees, and ahead, the wilderness begins to open up. The Tasmania that existed long before convicts, long before Europeans, long before anyone thought to call this place the bottom of the world. The Tasman Highway traces Tasmania's eastern coastline. Winding through small fishing villages, past white sand beaches, and along cliffs where the Tasman Sea crashes with relentless force. This is the gentler side of Tasmania, the side that appears in travel brochures. But even here, at its most accessible, the island refuses to be tamed. Our first stop is Wineglass Bay, consistently ranked among the world's most beautiful beaches. The name is literal. From the lookout on the saddle between Mount Amos and Mount Mason, the bay curves in a perfect crescent, its white sand beach forming the base of a glass. The water is a gradient of blues, from pale turquoise in the shallows to deep sapphire where the bay opens to the sea. The hike to the lookout is steep but short. Through Tasmanian coastal scrub, over granite boulders to a wooden platform that overlooks the bay. On a clear day, the view is so perfect it almost looks artificial, like a painting. Like something that couldn't possibly exist naturally. But it does. And it has for thousands of years, long before it was called Wineglass Bay, long before it became a destination. The Oyster Bay people knew this place, camped on these shores, fished these waters, until they were driven out, killed, or forced onto missions by European settlers. The extinction of Tasmania's Aboriginal people is one of the darkest chapters in colonial history. When Europeans arrived in 1803, there were an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 Aboriginal Tasmanians. By 1847, fewer than 50 remained, most of them relocated to Flinders Island in Bass Strait. The last full-blooded Tasmanian Aboriginal person, Truganini, died in 1876. Her death was treated as the extinction of an entire people. But that narrative was false. Aboriginal Tasmanians survived through mixed descent communities, and today, tens of thousands of Tasmanians identify as Aboriginal. The culture was suppressed, but never fully erased. Standing at Wineglass Bay, it's impossible not to think about who stood here before us, who saw this view and called it home. The land remembers even if the records don't. Further north along the coast lies the Bay of Fires, a 30-kilometer stretch of coastline where white sand meets orange lichen-covered granite boulders. The contrast is surreal. The boulders glow almost red in the right light, as if lit from within. Against the blue water and white sand, it looks more like Mars than Earth. The name comes from the fires European explorers saw along the coast in 1773. Aboriginal people burning the coastal scrub, managing the land in ways the Europeans didn't understand and didn't bother to learn. Today, the Bay of Fires is protected. No development, no resorts. Just a walking track that follows the coastline, passing through coastal heathland, over granite headlands, and along beaches so empty you can walk for hours without seeing another person. The water here is cold. This is the Tasman Sea, fed by Antarctic currents. Even in summer, it rarely exceeds 18 degrees Celsius, 64 degrees Fahrenheit. But that doesn't stop people from swimming. Locals are used to it. Visitors gasp and retreat. It's a reminder that Tasmania doesn't cater to comfort. At the northern end of the Bay of Fires, the landscape changes. The beaches give way to rockier coastline. The scrub thickens into forest, and the road turns inland, climbing into the highlands. This is where Tasmania's east coast ends and its interior begins, where the gentle gives way to the wild, where the tourist trails run out and the real wilderness takes over. And at the heart of that wilderness, rising above the forests like a stone cathedral, is Tasmania's most iconic peak. Cradle Mountain doesn't tower over Tasmania. At 1,545 meters, 5,069 feet, it's not even the island's highest peak. But it dominates in a different way. It commands attention, it defines the landscape, and it represents everything Tasmania's wilderness is about. The mountain sits within Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park, part of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. This designation, granted in 1982 and expanded several times since, protects over 1.58 million hectares. That's 25% of Tasmania. 1/4 of the island is UNESCO-protected wilderness. Cradle Mountain itself is a jagged ridge of dolerite, a type of volcanic rock that cooled slowly underground and was later exposed by erosion. The result is a series of columns, cliffs, and shattered boulders that give the mountain its distinctive serrated profile. From Dove Lake, a glacially carved lake at the mountain's base, the peak is perfectly framed. On calm days, the mountain reflects in the still water, creating one of the most photographed scenes in Australia. On stormy days, clouds engulf the summit and wind whips across the lake, turning the surface into white caps. Tasmania's weather is famously unpredictable. A local saying goes, "If you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes." This is especially true in the highlands. Sun, rain, wind, and even snow can occur in a single day, any time of year. Snow has been recorded in every month, even January, the height of summer. The Dove Lake Circuit is a 6-kilometre track that loops around the lake. It's one of Tasmania's most popular walks, and for good reason. The track passes through ancient rainforest, over glacially polished bedrock, past rushing streams, and along boardwalks built to protect the fragile alpine vegetation. But the real challenge is the summit. The hike to the top of Cradle Mountain is a scramble over loose rock, exposed ridges, and steep slopes where a single misstep could be catastrophic. There are no railings, no safety barriers, just rock, sky, and the understanding that if you make a mistake, help is hours away. The summit offers 360-degree views. To the north, mountains roll toward Bass Strait. To the south, the Tasmanian wilderness stretches unbroken to the southwest. On a clear day, you can see dozens of peaks, countless lakes, and forests that have never been logged. But what makes Cradle Mountain special isn't just the views, it's what lives here. This is one of the last strongholds of the Tasmanian devil, the world's largest carnivorous marsupial. Once common across Tasmania, devils have been decimated by a contagious facial tumour disease that has killed over 80% of the population since it was discovered in 1996. In the wild, devils are nocturnal and shy. You rarely see them during the day. But at night, their eerie screeches echo through the forest. A sound that's been described as somewhere between a scream and a growl. It's unsettling the first time you hear it, and it's a reminder that Tasmania's wilderness is not a theme park. It's a functioning ecosystem where predators still hunt, where death is as natural as life, and where humans are visitors, not owners. Cradle Mountain is also home to wombats, wallabies, echidnas, platypuses, and countless bird species. The forests here are temperate rainforests, dominated by myrtle beech, kingbilly pine, and sassafras. Some of these trees are over 1,000 years old. They were saplings when the Vikings reached North America. They were mature trees when the British arrived in Tasmania. To walk through these forests is to walk through time. The air smells of moss and damp earth. The canopy blocks out most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight even at noon. And the silence is profound. No traffic, no machinery. Just wind, water, and the occasional call of a bird. This is Tasmania's soul. Not the coast, not the cities, this, the wilderness. The places where humans are tolerated but not welcomed, where nature operates on its own terms, indifferent to our presence. But Cradle Mountain is just one peak in a vast wilderness. To truly understand Tasmania's scale, you have to go further, deeper into the southwest, where roads end and trails fade into nothing. Southwest Tasmania is the most remote, most rugged, most inhospitable part of the island. It is also the most pristine. There are no roads here, no towns, no permanent settlements, just mountains, rivers, button grass plains, and forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrates. This is wilderness in the truest sense, a place where humans are visitors and nature is absolute. The southwest was the last part of Tasmania to be explored by Europeans. Even into the 20th century, large sections remained unmapped. Mountaineers and bushwalkers who ventured in often didn't come back. Some got lost in the dense scrub. Others were caught by sudden weather changes. A few simply disappeared. Their bodies never found. One of the most famous wilderness areas is the Franklin Gordon Wild Rivers National Park, part of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. The Franklin River, which cuts through the heart of this park, became the centre of one of Australia's most significant environmental battles. In the early 1980s, the Tasmanian government proposed damming the Franklin River to create a hydroelectric reservoir. The dam would have flooded vast areas of pristine wilderness, including ancient Aboriginal sites and unique ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. Environmentalists opposed the plan. Protests were organised. Thousands of people travelled to Tasmania to blockade construction sites. Over 1,400 protesters were arrested. The issue became a national debate, splitting the country between those who believed in development and those who believed some places should remain untouched. In 1983, the Australian High Court ruled in favour of the environmentalists. The dam project was cancelled, the Franklin River was saved, and Tasmania's wilderness became a symbol of what could be protected if people were willing to fight for it. Today, the Franklin River flows freely. Rafting expeditions run the river during summer, navigating rapids, camping on riverbanks, and passing through gorges so narrow that cliffs rise hundreds of feet on both sides, blocking out the sky. But the southwest is not just rivers, it's also mountains. Federation Peak, for example, is considered one of Australia's most challenging climbs. Not because of altitude, it's only 1,224 meters, but because of terrain. The approach requires days of hiking through dense forest and button grass plains. The final ascent involves exposed rock climbing on crumbling dolerite. Weather can turn deadly in minutes, and rescue, if needed, is measured in days, not hours. Only experienced climbers attempt Federation Peak, and many turn back. The mountain has a reputation for breaking resolve, for showing people their limits, for reminding them that some places don't care about human ambition. The southwest is also home to Bathurst Harbour, one of the most remote anchorages in Australia. Accessible only by boat or a multi-day hike, it's a deep-water harbour surrounded by mountains and rainforest. Early European explorers used it as a refuge during storms. Convicts occasionally escaped here, hoping to hide in the wilderness. Most died. The harbour is eerily quiet. The water is dark, stained by tannins leached from the surrounding vegetation. The air is still, and the sense of isolation is overwhelming. Stand on the shore of Bathurst Harbour, and you're standing in one of the last truly wild places in the temperate world. This is the southwest. a place that resists. A place that endures. A place that reminds us, with every gust of wind and every drop of rain, that wilderness is not a backdrop for human activity. It is the default state of the world. And we are the anomaly. But not all of Tasmania's wildness is inland. Some of it is written along the coast, in cliffs and caves and beaches that few people ever see. Off Tasmania's southeast coast, connected to the mainland by a narrow isthmus, lies Bruny Island. Technically two islands, North Bruny and South Bruny, joined by a sandy neck so narrow that ocean waves sometimes wash over the road. Bruny is quieter than the rest of Tasmania, slower. A place where time seems to move at a different pace. The population is around 1,000, most of them living in small settlements scattered along the coast. There are no traffic lights, no chain stores, just farms, forests and coastline. The island is named after French explorer Bruny d'Entrecasteaux, who sailed here in 1792, searching for the lost expedition of La Pérouse. He didn't find La Pérouse, but he charted the coastline and his name stuck, though the spelling changed over time. Bruny's real attractions are natural. The island is home to some of Tasmania's most dramatic coastal scenery, most of it concentrated on South Bruny. The Neck is the first stop. A narrow isthmus of sand connecting North and South Bruny. It's barely 100 meters wide at its narrowest point. Wooden stairs climb to a lookout offering views of both coasts. On one side, the Tasman Sea. On the other, the d'Entrecasteaux Channel. The contrast is striking. One side rough and wild, the other sheltered and calm. The Neck is also a rookery for little penguins, the smallest penguin species in the world. At dusk, they emerge from the water and waddle up the beach to their burrows in the dunes. Watching them is surreal. These tiny birds, barely 30 centimeters tall, navigating ocean currents by day and returning to the same burrow every night. Further south, the road deteriorates into gravel and climbs through eucalyptus forest to Cape Bruny Lighthouse. Built in 1836, it's the second oldest lighthouse in Australia and still operational. The tower is squat and solid, built from brick and designed to withstand the brutal winds that sweep across the cape. From the lighthouse, you can see the Southern Ocean stretching to the horizon. No land, no ships, just water and sky meeting in a line so sharp it looks drawn. But the real spectacle on South Bruny is the coastal cliffs. Accessible by boat tour, these dolerite cliffs rise vertically from the sea, some exceeding 200 meters in height. Waves crash against them with enough force to send spray 50 meters into the air. Sea caves have been carved into the rock, their interiors polished smooth by millennia of wave action. The boat tours navigate close to the cliffs, close enough to see the columnar jointing in the dolerite, the layers of rock that formed as magma cooled millions of years ago. Close enough to enter some of the sea caves, where the sound of waves echoes off stone walls and shafts of sunlight pierce through openings in the roof. Seals lounge on rock platforms, albatross glide past the cliffs, their wingspans exceeding 3 meters, and occasionally whales pass by, migrating along the coast between feeding grounds in Antarctica and breeding grounds in warmer waters to the north. Bruny Island is a microcosm of Tasmania. It has the forests, the wildlife, the coastline, the history. But it has something else too, a sense of sanctuary. the island feels protected, not by law, though much of it is, but by geography. The ferry crossing, the narrow isthmus, the gravel roads, all of it creates a barrier that keeps mass tourism at bay. This is Tasmania at its best. Accessible enough to visit, remote enough to feel wild, beautiful enough to remember, and fragile enough to protect. We return to where we began, Hobart. But this time, we're not looking at the city, we're looking from above it. Mount Wellington, known by its Aboriginal name Kunanyi, rises directly behind Hobart. A 1,271-metre peak that dominates the skyline and dictates the city's weather. Locals check the mountain every morning. If it's clear, the day will be fine. If it's shrouded in cloud, weather is coming. The mountain is accessible by a winding 22-kilometre road that climbs from sea level to the summit. The road passes through temperate rainforest, then subalpine woodland, then alpine moorland, and finally barren rock at the top. Each elevation zone has its own ecosystem. The lower slopes are dominated by eucalyptus and tree ferns. Higher up, snow gums appear, twisted and stunted by wind. Near the summit, only hardy grasses and lichens survive. The summit itself is a plateau of dolerite boulders and shattered rock. In winter, it's often covered in snow. In summer, it can be warm enough to sit in a t-shirt, but usually it's cold and windy. The wind on Kunanyi can exceed 100 kilometers per hour. On those days, standing upright is difficult. Walking is dangerous, but the view is worth the wind. From the summit, you can see all of Hobart spread below. The Derwent River winding through the city. The harbour filled with boats, the suburbs climbing the hills, and beyond, the Southern Ocean, stretching to the curve of the horizon. To the west, mountains roll into the distance, layer after layer, fading to blue. To the south, Storm Bay opens toward Antarctica. To the north, the Midlands stretch toward Launceston, Tasmania's second city. Mount Wellington is not just a viewpoint, it's a reminder. A reminder that Hobart, for all its cafes and galleries and modernity, is still a city on the edge. A city at the bottom of the world. A city that exists because people were willing to live this far from everything else. The Aboriginal people knew Kunanyi long before Europeans arrived. It was a sacred mountain, a meeting place, a marker in the landscape. When Hobart was founded in 1804, the mountain became a resource. Timber was logged from its slopes, stone was quarried from its flanks, and eventually a road was built so that everyone could reach the top. Today, Kunanyi is protected as part of Wellington Park. The logging has stopped, the quarries are abandoned, and the mountain slowly is returning to wildness. This is Tasmania's pattern. Exploitation followed by realization, followed by protection. The island has learned, often too late, that some things are more valuable intact than exploited. The forests, the rivers, the wildlife, the wilderness. And standing on the summit of Kunanyi, looking out over an island that has survived so much, convicts, logging, mining, damming and hunting, you realize that Tasmania is not fragile. It's resilient. It bends but doesn't break. It scars but heals. This is the bottom of the world. And it endures. No story about Tasmania is complete without mentioning what was lost: the Tasmanian tiger, thylacine, the largest carnivorous marsupial in modern times, and the most famous extinction of the 20th century. The thylacine looked like a dog but wasn't. It was a marsupial, more closely related to kangaroos than canines. It had a stiff tail, a wide gape, and distinctive stripes across its back. Hence the name tiger. For thousands of years, thylacines were apex predators in Tasmania. They hunted alone or in pairs, preying on wallabies, possums, and birds. Aboriginal Tasmanians respected them, depicting them in rock art and incorporating them into stories. But when Europeans arrived, the thylacine became a problem. Sheep farming expanded across Tasmania in the 1800s, and farmers blamed thylacines for livestock losses. Bounties were offered, hunters were paid per carcass, and over the course of a century, the population was systematically eliminated. By the early 1900s, thylacines were rare. By the 1920s, they were almost gone. The last known wild thylacine was shot in 1930. The last captive thylacine, a male named Benjamin, died in Hobart's Beaumaris Zoo in 1936. There is footage of Benjamin, black and white film showing a nervous, pacing animal in a concrete enclosure. It's heartbreaking to watch, not because the footage is dramatic, but because it's so ordinary. An animal in a cage, unaware that it's the last of its kind. Since 1936, there have been thousands of reported thylacine sightings. People claim to have seen them in remote forests, on back roads, at the edges of farmland. None of these sightings have been verified. No photographs, no bodies, no evidence that would satisfy science. Most experts believe the thylacine is extinct, but Tasmania is a place where hope dies slowly. And in the dense forests of the southwest, in the valleys no one hikes, in the wilderness that resists exploration, some people still believe there's a chance. The thylacine has become a symbol of what was lost, of what we failed to protect, of the cost of treating nature as an obstacle rather than a partner. Tasmania has learned this lesson, sometimes too late. The forests that were logged are now protected. The rivers that were nearly dammed now flow freely. The devils that are dying from disease are being bred in captivity to ensure survival. The island is trying to do better, to protect what remains, to remember what was lost, and to ensure that no other species disappears the way the thylacine did. Tasmania is home to some of the tallest flowering plants on Earth. Eucalyptus regnans, commonly known as swamp gum or mountain ash, can grow over 100 meters tall. Only California's coast redwoods grow taller. These giants exist in the wet forests of Tasmania's south and northwest, where rainfall exceeds 1,500 millimeters annually, and the soil is deep and fertile. Some of these trees are over 400 years old. They were saplings when the first fleet arrived in Australia. Mature trees when Port Arthur was built. To stand at the base of a 90-meter eucalyptus is to feel small. The trunk is wider than a car. The canopy is so high it disappears into mist. And the forest floor, shaded by the canopy, is carpeted in ferns, moss, and fungi. These forests were heavily logged in the 20th century. Old-growth trees were cut, milled, and exported. Entire valleys were cleared. Conservationists fought back, staging protests, blockading logging roads, and chaining themselves to trees. The battle over Tasmania's forests reached a peak in the 1980s and 90s. The conflict was bitter, dividing communities, families, and political parties. But slowly, protections increased. More forests were added to the World Heritage Area. Logging in old-growth forests was reduced, then eventually banned in some areas. Today, large tracts of Tasmania's ancient forests are protected. You can walk through them on the Tahuna Airwalk, a 600-metre elevated walkway that takes you into the forest canopy, 20 metres above the ground. From the walkway, you see the forest from a perspective few people experience. The layers, the complexity, the sheer scale of these living ecosystems. But protection doesn't mean immunity. Tasmania's forests face new threats. Climate change is altering rainfall patterns. Wildfires, once rare, are becoming more frequent and severe. In 2019, fires burned through parts of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, including ancient rainforests that had never burned before. The forest survived for millennia, but the future is less certain, and Tasmania, like everywhere else, is learning that protecting nature is not a one-time decision. It's a continuous effort, a commitment that must be renewed with every generation. We've travelled from Hobart to the wilderness and back. From the prison at Port Arthur to the peaks of Cradle Mountain. From the white sands of Wineglass Bay to the dark cliffs of Bruny Island. From the forests that survived logging to the summit of Mount Wellington, where the island spreads below like a map. And through it all, one truth becomes clear. Tasmania is not easy. It doesn't comfort, it doesn't compromise, it demands respect, endurance, and the willingness to accept that some places operate on their own terms. This is the bottom of the world. Not because of latitude alone, though at 42 degrees south, it's genuinely at the edge of the habitable temperate zone. But because it feels like the end of something, the last stop before the ocean takes over, the final place where forests still stand, where wilderness still dominates, where nature is not a backdrop but the main character. Tasmania was shaped by isolation. By distance, by the 150 miles of violent ocean that separate it from the mainland. That isolation protected it, kept it wild, kept it strange. Even today, when you can fly from Melbourne to Hobart in an hour, the island feels apart, different. Like it exists in a parallel version of Australia where nature was never fully conquered. The convicts who were sent here saw it as punishment, and it was. But they also built something. The stone warehouses in Hobart, the roads through the mountains, the ruins at Port Arthur. They left scars, but they also left evidence that humans, even at their worst, can endure. The Aboriginal people who lived here for 40,000 years understood the island in ways Europeans never did. They knew which plants were edible, which animals to hunt, how to read the weather, how to live with the land rather than against it. Their knowledge was nearly erased, but it survives in descendants, in place names, in the stories that are slowly being retold. The thylacine is gone, the forests have been scarred, the rivers have been threatened, but Tasmania endures. It bends but doesn't break. It scars but heals. And every year, more of it is protected. More wilderness is set aside. More people realize that some places are more valuable intact than exploited. Tasmania doesn't need us to survive. It survived ice ages. It survived human arrival. It will survive long after we're gone. But it allows us to visit, to walk its trails, to stand on its peaks, to witness what wilderness looks like when it's left alone. And that's the gift of Tasmania. Not that it's beautiful, though it is. Not that it's wild, though it is. But that it shows us what the world looks like when nature is in charge. When mountains decide where roads can go. When weather dictates schedules. When forests, not cities, dominate the landscape. This is the bottom of the world, the edge of maps, the place where continents run out and oceans take over. It's remote, it's rugged, it's relentless. And it's absolutely, utterly worth it. Thank you for journeying to the bottom of the world. If Tasmania has taught us anything, it's that some places are meant to stay wild, some horizons are meant to remain distant, and some islands are meant to remind us that the world is still bigger, stranger, and more resilient than we'll ever fully understand. See you on the next journey.